producing wells, down 45, and that seems like a bit of an enigma when you look at the fact that the number of not completed wells was down, number of inactive wells was down, number of completions was up. So one would have anticipated December active producing wells to be up. It was not. I took a look at plug and abandonment work the last quarter of 2017, and we had a large number of wells plugged and abandoned. So industry took the opportunity when there was good weather, October, November, the first 3 weeks of December, to deal with a fairly large backlog of abandoned wells and wells that had been temporary abandoned that failed their mechanical integrity test. And so we had a lot of plugging of legacy wells, or I guess you would call them, legacy conventional wells, the fourth quarter of 2017. Permitting back up after the end of the year. It's always slower in a holiday month like December, and it was slower. You notice oil price dropped a little more than $5 a barrel from January to today. The oil markets have not been liking the information. They've not liked the increase in U.S. storage, and they've not liked the EIA's projections and the IEA projections that North Dakota crude productions, or not North Dakota, but North American crude production is going to grow rapidly and is going to be able to match any kind of growth in demand that occurs. And so what you've seen is oil prices kind of stall out and in fact fall back a little bit. Not all that surprising. I mean, people in the industry were optimistic, but cautiously optimistic, kind of expecting that sort of reaction to production growth and storage numbers going up. Interestingly enough, if you look at the chart that I've started including on U.S. crude oil stocks, and this is oil that's in storage in tanks outside of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So this is oil that could go to market today if there was a place for it to go. Crude oil stocks always increase this time of year, but the market doesn't like this current increase, and that's just because that coupled with the projection of large production growth this year has the market nervous about where prices should be going. So it's taken a pause and dropped back just a little bit. Again, kind of going back to wells waiting on completion, wells completed, waiting on completion down, wells completed up. It looks like the frac crews, at least in the month of December, the first 3 weeks, the weather was nice, and we've got 30 to 31, maybe on a really good day, 32 crews working in the state, and they're able to keep up, or a little more than keep up, with the 57 drilling rigs that are operating. Two rig increase on Fort Berthold. And that kind of sets up a talking point that I wanted to visit and discuss, and that is we are really struggling with gas capture on Fort Berthold, and yet we saw a rig increase. And so looking a little deeper into that, the companies who have added rigs in that area are companies that have significant off-reservation production that they can use to offset bad gas capture numbers on the reservation. So if they have enough off-reservation production, they can average it out on a county-wide or statewide basis and still meet the gas capture goals, as they did. Operators in total, statewide in the Bakken at 88%, with the current requirement being 85 and the upcoming requirement being 88. That being said, industry is extremely concerned about being able to grow production and meet the 88%. And so the Petroleum Council has restarted its gas capture task force. They have met one time, and they're going to meet numerous times within the next few months to talk operators and midstreamers together to see what they can come up with in terms of meeting those gas capture goals, and do they need to have a talk with the regulators about those gas capture requirements. I'll close with a couple of comments on the federal rulemaking stuff. A couple of rulemakings that just don't ever seem to want to end. BLM venting and flaring took another turn Monday, just 3 days ago, when they announced that they were going to be publishing a new methane waste prevention rule, which they say is going to take the waste prevention or venting and flaring requirements back to what they were before the 2016 rule. It hasn't been published yet. I haven't seen it, but we'll be talking about it and making comments on it. And then on the hydraulic fracturing, still waiting for the Federal Circuit Court to decide whether it's going to issue its mandate, which would basically dismiss the Wyoming case. North Dakota has asked that court not to do that because there is litigation going on in California now, and it would be better if the Wyoming District Court judgment stayed in place, keeping the preliminary injunction in place. So a little bit of activity on those two rules that are, well, they're going to stay in litigation for a good while. So I guess to kind of sum it up, good old North Dakota winter has set in, and we saw it the last week of December. I think we're going to see it in the January production numbers, and probably even lingering around in the February numbers. And so in conversations last week in Houston with the North American Prospect Expo folks, we talked about, everybody wanted to know, when is North Dakota going to break its record? When's production going to go back up and break the record? And we kind of jokingly said, the first month that we get 30 nice days of weather. So that will not be this month. And it certainly was not January. So we'll see how that goes. With that, take some questions. Try to put a little levity into this, huh? On a cold winter day.
Question from the webinar, 10 rigs added in second and third quarter. Any way to equate what a barrel a day increase that might be?
I haven't really given that much thought, although the numbers that the EIA has been publishing indicate that for every operating drilling rig in the Bakken, we should see like a 1,300 barrel a day production increase. So I mean, that would indicate to you that month over month we should be seeing 13,000 barrel a day production increases, which I think once we get into nice weather and we can really actually frack these wells and flow them back properly, we'll probably get back to those kind of numbers.
Do you have the volume that was flared?
Oh, I do have that volume. Give me just a second to get to the right page. This is a preliminary number for December, 284 million cubic foot per day. And I usually like to try to equate that to, you know, well, what does that mean? Because it's a strange number, you know, millions of cubic feet. Our brains don't think that way. That would be roughly the equivalent of the entire Tioga gas plant that Hess operates. So if you could aggregate all of that production into a pipe, it would be enough to feed a huge gas plant like Hess's Tioga gas plant.
That's a great segue. Since Tioga or Hess announced that they're having a new plant.
I got that number wrong. I flipped my pages
okay.
around.
Sorry.
Let me just back up. The actual flared number was 273 million cubic feet a day, down 10 million from the previous month. Previous month was 283. In both cases, it's pretty close, and in both cases, it roughly equates to one very large natural gas plant, or almost 1.5.
Okay, so speaking of Hess's gas plant, they recently announced their new plant with Targa.
Correct.
How much, or will that be enough to make a difference in terms of gas processing that we need in the state?
Based on our best estimates, that will be really just enough to keep up. that it really is questionable whether it's going to make it possible for industry to reach the 88% gas capture. Clearly, absolutely necessary, and it looks like it's going to be just enough for industry in McKenzie County to be able to keep up with the 85% gas capture. Part of the problem, and so I had a chance to meet with the Targa folks. They have spent the last year, all of 2017, putting in bigger pipes. So there's great news. They have looped their lines and increased the size of their gas gathering pipelines. So they have the size of pipes in place that they need. They have a large number of compressors on order, and they're going to be installing those this year. So they're going to have the gas compression in place. This plan will put the large gathering pipeline from Fort Berthold to Watford City in place and build the plant. So now what they're struggling with is the small pipes that go from their compressors out to the wells. But a lot of the work has been done and will be done this year, some of the really heavy lifting of big pipes and big compressors. So they're making progress. But they are very concerned about 18 and 19. Spoke with the CEO yesterday. Apparently they have all the rights of ways that they need to get their work done this year. It's the 2019 work that they're really concerned about.
Is this about flaring?
Oh, no, it will follow up on that.
Okay.
Yeah, on
Right.
flaring, because of course, One Oak is going to do a more than double the size. Is it Bear Creek? That's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In Dunn County. How will that affect?
Again, that really should help with northern Dunn County and the gathering and processing there. So in some of those fields like Wolf Bay and Werner Field, we should see gas capture really improve there. But what we're seeing in that eastern McKenzie, northern Dunn County area where the reservation lands exist is that operators are ready, prepared, and in fact even acting on it to add rigs and frac crews as fast as they can build gas gathering capacity. So what the CEOs of One Oak and Targa and Crestwood are saying is that as fast as they can build it, the operators are filling it. And in fact, they wonder if they can catch up and get ahead in 2018. But it will certainly help. It's going to be absolutely necessary to even be able to meet the 85%.
So all those things considered, what do you think needs to be done to prevent future production restrictions? What do you think can be done that industry isn't already doing?
I think the one big impediment at this point is rights of way on BIA controlled land. That there's conversations going on about how can we take some of the hurdles out of that right of way process. There are numerous approvals required. It seems like pipeline by pipeline, they're still doing environmental assessments, and there are multiple approvals required. So our goal is that this spring, if Secretary Zinke is able to come to the May conference, is to get him together with tribal officials and state officials and folks from the BIA land office and work out some solutions. But that's probably the number one thing. I guess it's great news that natural gas and NGLs are profitable now. So they are generating money, and that money is going to be reinvested into bigger pipes and compressors and gas plants. There was a time period in 16 and 17 where it was a money loser. Every cubic foot of natural gas that was gathered and processed cost money. And so there was no money being generated. That's how we got in this position, where there is no spare capacity for any kind of growth. So we're back in that situation where as fast as you can build it, they will fill it.
And so, in short, we are still working with Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, BIA, and the federal government in terms of trying to speed up approval process right away. We're looking to improve that process.
Pretty good summary. I did mention to the Industrial Commission yesterday that almost 2 weeks ago now, we met with folks from 3 affiliated tribes, and we had a really good meeting. Came to understand a lot of things there with regards to their approval process, and it was encouraging to find out that the multiple steps in their approval process really only affect tribal lands and setbacks of gas gathering or gathering pipelines from homes and buildings. And so we came to realize that the tribes process really is not what's inhibiting the right-of-way process, that it's federal and it's BIA. And so that's going to be our focus for the next few months is working on that. So in answer, what more could industry do? Probably the biggest thing industry could do, and my message to operators, talking with them last week in Houston, was when somebody brings you an infrastructure project, commit. The only way that gathering and processing and export capacity is going to get built is if operators will commit their oil and gas to those projects so they can get funded and permitted and built. And so, that really was our message, was that those things are all going to fill over the next few years, and to get the next generation of that built, you got to commit your oil and gas.
Anybody in the room have anything else on flaring, or can we switch
What
gears?
is the current capacity to process gas in North Dakota? Do you have that figure?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but this fellow over here probably does, Mr. Kringstad.
Thanks.
We'll ask him. I know he had a really nice chart that I saw about a week and a half ago that showed all the plants and their nameplate capacity and what they've been running at. So.
Okay, then we will switch from flaring to weather.
Mm-hmm.
What's your 7-day forecast? No. Is the weather impact simply because frac fluids freeze? Why does the weather have such an impact?
Yeah, it is mostly because of freezing frac fluids. For example, I met with the CEO and management committee from a couple of different companies in Houston last week, and they went from 2 drilling rigs down to 1 and are not completing any wells in December, January, February, maybe even March. In their opinion, it costs entirely too much money to heat the frac water and to operate safely in these kind of weather conditions. Good example is the technical experts at Halliburton said that the modern frac technology uses friction reducers and surfactants that really like the water to be at 70 degrees. That's ideal. Well, when the outside temperature is minus 20, the cost of 70-degree water is just too high. So that's really the big issue. And if you couple that with the amount of wind that we've been having, it makes it even harder to heat the water. So,
what about workforce, and we kind of touched on infrastructure constraints, but are we still having workforce constraints?
Discussed that some with several of the oil and gas operators and the service companies. Interestingly enough, they're not that concerned about it. They have been able to start eliminating, I guess you'd say, discounts on some of their services. With the better crude oil prices, they're able to charge more, they're able to pay more, and attract workforce. Our lieutenant governor came up with a really great idea, and we pitched it to some service companies in Houston last week, and they were very excited about it. In the early part, or during the big Bakken boom, a lot of people moved to the state and they brought their kids here, and high schools in Dickinson, Williston, Watford City are full of young people whose parents work in the oil patch. And the idea that our lieutenant governor had was, why don't you go into these high schools and contact juniors or kids in their first semester of their senior year, provide them some training, and when they graduate, they'll be ready to go to work for service companies. And so they are planning to jump on that and implement that idea. There is a ready-made crop of people who already live in North Dakota, which is their preference, that they could potentially, with a minimal amount of training, put to work as far as a trained workforce. So they did not seem all that concerned about workforce problems at this point. And we've seen it here at the agency. Had 3 people hired away in the last couple of months. So yeah, they're offering more money, and they're hiring people.
It sounds like you've been down that road before.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if nothing from the room, I will leave this as one of the last questions because we're running out of time. You didn't touch on break-evens at all.
Oh,
so
my apologies.
any surprises in the break-even numbers, especially since break-evens are $18 a barrel statewide? Why isn't production ramping up?
Yeah, and again, I should have done that because we like to publish those break-evens once a quarter. And there were a couple of interesting surprises in there I wanted to talk about. First, let's talk about the statewide average and the core. The core is steady to even better than it was in the previous quarter. And so those 4 primary counties, absolutely no problem making money in any of those counties in North Dakota. Obviously, you know, I got to point to the weather, and wintertime is why production is not ramping up. We currently have crude oil capacity, we have gas export capacity, and some limitations on gas capture, but nothing that's really holding production back that much. It honestly is the winter weather. But a couple of things in the break-evens that showed up was that the well performance in Billings and Golden Valley County was less than stellar. The wells, the newer wells that came on towards the end of the year in Billings and Golden Valley County, performance was much poorer, and the break-even values went up in both of those counties, and the rig count went to 0. So those numbers really are real. But overall, the break-even prices are very healthy for the state, and in fact dropped in most of the core counties. A little bit better natural gas prices. Honestly, you know, low costs and high efficiency. So.
Okay, I put in a last call to the webinar. I'll put in a last call to the room. Nobody?
It's your challenge to say frozen frac fluid 6 times fast.
Frozen frac fluid 6 times.
I'm not going there.
Yeah.
I know what would come out of my mouth.
Okay, well with that,
Thanks.
we will switch to Justin. Frozen frac fluid.
Well, I had to do that. Allison, at the governor's, when they announced the dashboard, then this dashboard they've got at the Department of Commerce.
Okay.
I said, "Oh, so Governor, you're still telling me it's paradise by the dashboard light." He liked it. He liked it. I had to.
And I'm not so young, Dave, that I know what that means. Woo! Quit moving so much.
Too fast for the camera.
Yeah. Okay,
All right.
ready?
You ready on your side?
Almost. Go for it, JK.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. Pretty standard set of information for everyone here this afternoon. We'll get started right away with the oil production information. Again, still very little activity. One rig currently active on the Montana portion of the Williston Basin, and 0 rigs currently active in South Dakota. And really, at this point, I don't see anything changing on that front anytime soon, particularly with South Dakota. I don't anticipate any type of drilling activity there until prices recover higher. And as well as eastern Montana, I don't expect a big ramp up in any type of drilling or completion activity impacting the transportation needs for the region anytime soon. When we look at the month-over-month production changes, again, the green portion of this graphic is the crude oil, the red is the natural gas. Again, on the crude oil side, the last time production dipped this much was exactly a year ago at December of 16. And so again, that was weather-related activity during that time period, and we experienced the same thing as Lynn alluded to earlier in that month of December. When we look at transportation dynamics from the region for December, again, there's some very slight changes. We saw that oil production overall dropped from the basin, and where I estimated most of those barrels came out of was out of the rail network, and so that the pipeline market share did rise slightly, and we did see some drawback on the utilization of crude by rail out of the region. And so when we look at the percentages, again, over the last number of months since Dakota Access went into service last summer, very consistent type of market shares between the pipe and the rail, at least in the current time frame. As well, holding that position steady has been Brent WTI spread that has also been trending north of $5 for the last number of months. And so as we look at that, historically, that $5 to $6 range typically was enough to start seeing some fluctuations between barrels utilized in rail or not utilized in rail. And so as we move into 2018, we'll keep an eye on that. If that spread widens at all, we may start to see some barrels moving back towards the rail markets. Again, in my opinion, it's very near the tipping point for those decisions on the marketing side of the industry. Slide 6, again, this is just that updated graphic of my estimates for crude by rail. Again, right around 120,000 barrels of crude by rail leaving each day from the region. Again, down slightly from the November numbers. Where those barrels are headed, there has been some additional movement as far as the market destination of crude by rail. And so this is pulled from some of the EIA information that's out there. So looking at November, we did start to see some continued shift of more barrels moving towards that east coast or the PAD 1 region, which is shown in green on this graphic. The purple portion is that PAD 5 or the west coast, more specifically the Pacific Northwest, where those barrels are headed. So again, an interesting dynamic of what the markets are doing and where those barrels are wanting to head out of North Dakota. So again, we'll keep an eye on that. Pricing dynamics for that month of November, if you look at PAD 1 and PAD 5, the east and the west coast, very similar, 50 cents per barrel difference between those two markets. And then next on the lower side would be that PAD 3 or the Gulf Coast region. Again, slightly lower than the PAD 1 or 5. Where we sit today, that Brent WTI spread has gone down from that $6 differential we had seen in, say, November, December timeframe. So at least as we sit today, I would anticipate that, again, those marketing decisions would be drawing barrels back towards the pipeline network. Also, interestingly, that the LLS WTI spread has gone down as well, along with the Brent WTI spread. So those barrels that are moving down the Dakota Access pipeline system into that LLS or light sweet market down on the Gulf Coast, at least relative to WTI, may not be getting as big of an advantage that we had seen over the past 6 months or so. So as we move in and we start to see some of the January, February, and potentially March and beyond crude prices come from North Dakota, we'll keep this in the back of our mind as maybe one of the drivers. If we do see some shifts in the North Dakota WTI spread, we'll take a look at what was happening with LLS, what was happening with some of these other major benchmarks and how they're trickling back into North Dakota. Moving on to the trucking dynamics. Again, I know there's a lot of interest from some folks on what's taking place here. So again, we saw for another record set as far as the amount of crude being trucked north into Canada. So again, they're just moving north of the border and then getting on, in my best estimate, is just one of the, likely an Enbridge pipeline system north of the border, and then coming back down into the US. And so as a data person, taking a look at those numbers, I wanted to, again, just double check and verify that there wasn't some type of error going on. So slide 11, I included a new chart just for this specific month, and I compared the trucking numbers that I'm reporting from the U.S. International Trade Commission to what the EIA is reporting from a holistic PADD 2 exports. And so PADD 2 includes North Dakota all the way through the Great Lakes region. So there are additional barrels that you can see in blue moving north into Canada. But if you look at the trends between what's happening in North Dakota and that overall trend of what's happening with PADD 2, that gives me some additional confidence that what's being reported and what we're seeing in the numbers here for North Dakota is accurate. And so we are seeing these large volumes continue to move north into Canada. Again, we don't have a lot of color as to why that's taking place. Those are marketing decisions by those folks performing those activities. Moving on to the natural gas side, again, as Lynn alluded to, slightly down in the amount of gas being flared. Very similar trends as far as why that gas is being flared. A large percentage of that, or almost all of it, occurring from wells that are connected to a pipeline network. And so, as the industry looks to some of the challenges in the near term and the long term, again, it's working through what type of bottlenecks exist either at the wellhead itself or along the supply chain from the wellhead all the way to that gas processing plant in order to, again, reduce the size of that orange portion of this graphic. And then again, just looking at the historic trend, that orange slice over the last number of months has been going down. So we have seen some success on the industry side as well as debottlenecking their system, whether that's pigging activities, looping, compression. There's a whole host of activities they can perform in order to, again, maximize the throughput on those systems. And then last but not least, looking at, again, how the industry is doing on the gas gathering side, how quickly they're getting connected to wells. And so looking at the December numbers, very close hand in hand, the number of new wells being brought online with the number of wells that got connected to a gas gathering system. Again, then the challenge becomes making sure that those connections have adequate flow from that well to the processing plant. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. I do have an update. There was a question earlier about the current gas plant capacity for the region. 2.15 billion cubic feet per day is the current gas processing capacity. Year end of 2018, if the projects that have been proposed or under construction get built in the timeline, we would be at 2.55 billion cubic feet per day, year end of 18. And then year end of 19, with the additional 2 plants from One Oak and Arrow Field Services, that would put the state at 2.76 BCF per day.
With less rail activity, are you aware of any sell-offs of tanker cars or cars that may be used for oil storage?
No, I don't follow that market as far as the lease agreements, the lease rates, the terms, those type of things. So I don't have any color for those folks.
Could you explain what looping is?
Yep. So the question was one of those solutions in order to move more gas to the plant is looping. That's an industry term for putting a secondary pipeline right alongside the first. So again, a very common practice in North Dakota. The first pipeline system simply didn't have enough capacity. They would put a second pipe in or loop it. It's also not uncommon to put a third line in. Again, as we understand, higher performance from various regions. So again, working in that existing right away a third time. So,
are you expecting to see a lot more of that this year?
I would expect, yes. And so we'll see as activity ramps up, not only in the core, but also in those fringe areas. There's going to need to be additional infrastructure development, likely in a larger footprint, larger than we have seen over the last couple of years. And so we do anticipate more miles to be constructed in 2018, not only for natural gas, but the other fluids as well, the produced water and the crude oil.
I've just been thinking about, since one of my beats is the Public Service Commission. Yeah, the big thing that Hess is doing, a 19 miles of pipe, taking it from a gathering oil pipeline to a transmission oil pipeline. How many of these do you see a lot? Do you see a lot of these now, or do you see more of them?
So the question was those conversions from gathering to transmission, and so that gets into the jurisdictional change between the North Dakota Oil and Gas Division and the Public Service Commission. I don't have a hard number off the top of my head of how many of these conversions take place, but if a company decides to take a gathering line, convert it to transmission, they do need PSC approval to do so. And I expect that to be not uncommon as we move forward. Some of these gathering lines, they may be 8, 12, 16-inch gathering systems, and if they can add additional compression or horsepower and change the way that system operates, it would then fall under that new transmission category. So I do anticipate we see more of that in the coming years.
And just to follow up on the Hess thing, the commission had explained at this past meeting is that Hess was actually going to be using some pipelines under the lake, but then decided no, that they can't do that because permits are being tied up, and instead they've decided to hook to the Dakota Access Pipeline south of the lake.
Okay.
So is that is the lake still, is there still a bottleneck in terms of getting pipelines permitted?
It is, and so the lake, just physically, it does cause a challenge. And from a technical and an engineering perspective, it's not an easy crossing to make. And so then on top of the engineering challenges, you have the regulatory challenges associated with that. And so you do see solutions like this where companies are looking at, do we need to cross the lake? Can we find a solution, south or north or whatever that specific need may be? So I'm not surprised to see folks take looks at other options and say, can we move our product by another alternative means?
One more?
Can I ask one more?
You go right ahead. I've got one question on here, but it can wait.
Well, speaking of pipelines, if we get to the governor's goal of 2 million barrels of oil a day, when are we going to run out of pipeline capacity?
Yep. So that's a perfect question. So for those on the line, when does production exceed the new capacity with Dakota Access coming on last summer? And so my estimates, I forecast what I call case 1 and case 2, a high and a low case. I would anticipate it if industry follows my case 1 scenario within the next 12 to 18 months, production would exceed pipeline capacity again. And so we do have, again, some barrels right now moving by rail car. And so there is some additional cushion above and beyond that hard pipeline capacity. And then we would see, again, the industry move from a phase that we're in now of that elective use of crude by rail to a necessary use of crude by rail in order to keep up with production growth.
Okay.
Are there any pipelines going through the permitting process that could alleviate that issue?
No. So as of right now, there are no projects on the table above and beyond Dakota Access.
Okay. I don't know if you have these with you, but I'm pretty sure you have them. So we can maybe follow up. For processing capacity, what's the estimated demand now at year end and end 2019?
Yep, and so I do have those exact numbers, just not handy.
Yeah.
So I've got a nice chart I can get to Allison and get out to whoever would like it. So it again uses those forecast scenarios, and then coupled behind on that same graphic is our processing plant capacity.
All right. Anybody else?
Well, since you mentioned pipeline, nothing in the pipeline right now.
Yeah, nothing in the pipeline.
What about is sandpiper at all still a possibility?
Right now, officially, from what I understand, in the position that Enbridge made public, that was taken off the table. I can say that all the incumbent players in North Dakota and folks that don't currently participate in North Dakota's movement of crude oil, they're looking at the Bakken for opportunities. And so they're trying to understand, again, what does this growth look like? What's the appropriate timing? What's the appropriate destination? What's the appropriate capacity? So all those things need to be understood so that they can come forward with a project for the industry to support. Again, if you come out with a project too large, small, the economics aren't right, it may not succeed. And so there's a lot of internal discussions and analysis going on right now to say what is the next step.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.